gonna turn on you in the end, and black folks not gonna forget it. You better believe that. I'm not gonna forget, and I'm not gonna let my people forget what y'all have done to harm my people. And number 3, create your own universities, and that way you ain't gotta deal with them folks. I mean, that's a black man that's even still giving you some friendly advice.
When we imagine getting into college in the US, it often looks like a race to fill a limited number of seats. A good SAT score, plus 10. Class president, plus 8. You play the bassoon, plus 15. We mostly agree that these factors are a good way to decide who should get a seat. But there's one factor where Americans disagree: race.
Should race continue to play a role in how colleges pick their students?
Why should I be discriminated against because I'm white?
As a tool to increase diversity, affirmative action has been successful.
Why are you explicitly supporting a system that penalizes people for the color of their skin?
High-achieving kids having under-resourced neighborhoods and under-resourced schools need and deserve a leg up in admissions.
There's a reason this debate makes you want to cry, and it's not just because it's about race. It's because we suck at talking about race-based affirmative action. And there are 2 simple reasons why. One reason we suck at talking about affirmative action is because many of us don't actually know what it is. It was originally a way for colleges and universities to give special consideration to racial minorities to help undo the effects of past discrimination. And for many schools, it meant setting aside a certain percentage of their seats for minority applicants, including the University of California, Davis Medical School. But that changed in 1978 because of this man, Alan Bakke. Bakke was rejected twice by the UC Davis Medical School, so he filed a lawsuit. Back then, the school reserved 16 of the 100 seats for minority students in an effort to remedy past discrimination. It was a quota. Bakke argued he had higher academic scores than several minority students who were accepted. And in 1978, the Supreme Court sided with Bakke. The court said the school couldn't use quotas to racially balance the student body, and that they couldn't consider race to remedy past racial discrimination. The reasoning? Justice Lewis Powell wrote that societal discrimination is not a valid reason for considering race. So Bakke was admitted to UC Davis and became a doctor.
97 medical students graduated there today, among them Alan Bakke.
But his case didn't end affirmative action. It just redefined it. Here's the rest of Justice Powell's decision.
The only state interest that fairly may be viewed as compelling on this record is the interest of a university in a diverse student body.
So university administrators could no longer use affirmative action to address past discrimination, but they could use it to create a diverse student body. And to be fair, diversity is beneficial to everyone. For example, research shows that it exposes students to different ways of thinking, which helps them better solve problems. But here's what's so confusing. The court said colleges couldn't use quotas to create diversity, but later the court said colleges needed concrete diversity goals. So how do you have a goal without naming an actual number? Well, one way would be to give bonuses to all students of a certain race, but in 2003, the court said that was not allowed. Instead, schools could consider an individual student's race if it was a factor of another factor. All of this means that our debates tend to paint a picture of affirmative action that just isn't correct. It's not a racial bonus or quota, and it's not about historical discrimination. It's a very narrow and frankly confusing tool for colleges to create more racial diversity. And it's that tiny sliver of affirmative action that many conservatives want to kill. And the latest effort comes in the form of a highly charged allegation. Harvard is discriminating against Asian Americans.
A group of about 60 Asian organizations is suing Harvard University.
At issue is whether the university imposes a cap on the number of qualified Asian American students that it admits.
But Harvard's argument is essentially that the Supreme Court says that we can use race in admissions to diversify our campus.
Harvard assigns each applicant something called a personal score to measure subjective things like kindness, courage, and leadership. And Asian applicants are scored lower on that metric than white applicants. Meanwhile, on the academic metric, Asian applicants tend to score higher than white applicants. So the plaintiffs argue that since Asians have better academic profiles, Harvard is using this personal score to balance out the number of Asians they get, which is ultimately a fancy racial quota. But in this chart, you can see that the share of Asian students varies a lot from year to year. If Harvard had a quota, you'd expect that share to stay the same. But even if Harvard wins its case, affirmative action opponents hope that this case will eventually go to the Supreme Court, a body that's recently become more conservative. And their ultimate hope is that this court will rule broadly and just kill affirmative action entirely. But there's another part of this story that we glossed over, and it makes this debate very confusing. Harvard really is giving Asians lower personal scores, and many Asians are pretty angry.
Asian American students are marked down subjectively.
I mean, courage, bravery, saying that Asian American students lack that, it's insulting.
It brings up the inevitable question: where do Asians fit into the affirmative action debate? It's a confusing question because Asians certainly face discrimination, but we've also had a lot of success in higher education. At very selective private colleges, Asians make up the second biggest group, even though we're a much smaller portion of the US population. But this isn't because Asians work harder or care more about education. Here's a chart of immigration to the US since 1820. That tiny red sliver is Asians. You can see that for much of American history, the US severely limited Asian immigration and enacted racist policies like the Chinese Exclusion Act. This means most of our families weren't subject to policies like Jim Crow and redlining that engineered separate schools and neighborhoods for white people. The US eventually allowed Asians into the country, and we arrived in large numbers. But US immigration policies selected for certain types of people. Here we can see the percentage of newly arrived US immigrants with college degrees, and Asians are among the most educated. This doesn't mean that all Asian Americans share the same history. Asia is a big continent, and our histories vary pretty widely. Here we can see poverty rates are very different across these groups. But by looking at our histories, which were largely determined by our skin color and ethnicity, we can understand how Asians might face racist admissions practices, but how that doesn't mean Asians suffer systemic disadvantages in education. And that's the other reason we suck at talking about affirmative action. We often ignore the history. Opponents of affirmative action say that any policy that considers a person's race violates the 14th Amendment, which says everyone is guaranteed equal protection of the laws. But looking at our history helps us understand why that's misleading. The Equal Protection Clause was created to protect the rights of Black people after the Civil War, and the Supreme Court has cited it in decisions like Brown v. Board and Loving v. Virginia, cases that made American society more inclusive. And the Supreme Court has ruled time and again that being inclusive doesn't mean we have to be colorblind. For example, today's schools are still highly segregated, and children of color still face major disadvantages. So creating a more inclusive system requires us to recognize the role of race in America. And this is arguably the best defense of affirmative action. But the Supreme Court says that schools can't use the history of racial discrimination as a defense for considering race. The only thing schools can say is, diversity is good for everyone. And soon, if this Harvard case makes it in front of the court, colleges might not even be able to make that argument. Which means a place like Harvard, the training ground for America's elite, where about 1 in 4 students are currently Black or Hispanic, would go back to looking the way it did 2 generations ago. And conservatives will finally get the colorblind process they've long dreamed of.
I thought that you got with old Edward Bloom and went to the Supreme Court and got affirmative action removed out of college admissions, which actually helped Asian Americans, but they sided with them anyway. Now I want you to watch this short clip, of a young woman, Asian woman, that's talking about this issue, but we're gonna kind of expound this just a little bit more.
Oh, look at that. Asian Americans signing on to be used as tools of white supremacy to dismantle affirmative action did nothing to address the discrimination faced by Asian Americans in college admissions. Because dismantling affirmative action didn't address the fact that selective colleges admit Asian American applicants at a rate 28% less than similarly qualified white applicants. It's almost like the discrimination faced by Asian Americans in college admissions never had anything to do with black students or affirmative action, and had everything to do with legacy admissions and the choices that colleges make to discriminate against Asian Americans in order to give preferential treatment to lesser qualified white students. If only black people had tried to warn us. Oh wait, they did.
As I said in the podcast, and I'll say again, the purpose of them going to court was to harm black Americans. You understand? Of course, old Edward here is trying to harm black Americans because he's trying to reel everything back that black Americans fought for in this country. We already know how he get down, right? And this is why we don't look at religion when it comes to people like Edward here. We don't look at religion. We call it white supremacy because they're all on code with each other. You understand? So he wanted more of his community, the greater white community, to be allowed in these Ivy League institutions. See, there was an article that recently came out that talked about anytime Asian people move into an area where there's a lot of white people pack up and leave. They're citing it as they don't like to really get into competition with academics and things like that, so they have a white flight. The same thing they did with black people. Black people move to a neighborhood, they move out. Now Asians move into their neighborhoods and they're moving out. You understand what I'm saying? Because they don't want to compete. White supremacy is not about actual fair competition. Who studied more, who, trained more, who whatever. No, white supremacy is about an unfair privilege, an unfair advantage, unfair rewards for the simple fact that they're white. Not that they work for it, not that they earn it, none of that, okay? So Asian Americans thought that they listened to them, tell them that, oh, you see, them black people over there, they got into college because they're black. And it was just affirmative action that did that. They're not smart. Okay. But if you actually was looking more into it, you would see the black students actually have to do the work. Because being black get you so far. You still got to perform, right? And one thing I say about any black person, if I get a black doctor, if I get a black lawyer or anybody black, I know good and well they earned it because this system will never allow us to cheat. They're looking for any little thing we do to just get dismissed and get rid of us. So we have to earn it times 2. We have to be 10 times better than they are just to get in where they get it being mediocre. You understand? So when you sat there and you thought that you was going to harm black Americans, and see, you want to harm black America so you can get ahead. You understand? And look how the tables have turned. When you try to hurt black America, God's children, these things will happen to you. That goes to any group who tries to harm black Americans, just so you can get ahead. Now, I will say this. Why are some of you so hell-bent on getting into these people's colleges? Obviously, they don't want you in there. Why don't you, okay, you say you work so hard. You say that, they say you make more money than anybody else, right? Why don't you just create a historically Asian college and university? Create some HACUs. That's what I would do. If I'm part of the group that's making more money than anybody else, and I'm seeing discrimination constantly happen, why don't y'all just create the HACUs? Y'all get together, y'all get on code real quick to open businesses. Y'all pool, I've heard how y'all do it. Y'all get together, pool money together, open this person a business, that person, everybody open a business. Why don't you just open up an HACU? There you go. And then all the Asian people go to the HACUs, and you won't have to even worry about Harvard or Yale or anybody discriminating no more. Period. Because as long as you deal with these folks, you're going to deal with discrimination. Now, this is why also they're concerned about their numbers dwindling. Because people are seeing what they're doing, and really they're setting their children up, I would say. They're setting their children up to deal with the backlash of what they have done all these years. You understand what I'm saying? Because people are not going to forget the discrimination, whether they're Asian, whether they're black, whether they're Arab, or any of the other group that have been discriminated against by these folks. You understand what I'm saying? They're not going to forget whatsoever. So that's why they're concerned so much, because they say that Gen Z, their population, the minority is actually white. So they're trying to do whatever they can now to try to curve some of that. And it's not going to happen because it is ordained for them to become the minority. It's just already God ordained. But the lesson learned here is this. Listen to black folk when we tell you something, because we know them. We know them like the back of our hand, literally. We know them. Number 2, don't try to harm black folks so you can get ahead, because it's always going to turn on you in the end. And black folks not going to forget it. You better believe that. I'm not going to forget, and I'm not going to let my people forget what y'all have done to harm my people. And number 3, create your own universities. And that way you ain't got to deal with them folks. I mean, that's a black man just even still giving you some friendly advice. While y'all paying thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, taking all these advanced placement courses just to get in universities, and they see your name being Asian, and they have a legacy, which 9 times out of 10 are Caucasian, a legacy admission student who didn't pay none of that at all that you paid, didn't take none of the AP courses that you took, and just waltz right into Harvard and Yale because they're legacy. You should have had legacy admissions in your case. See, Edward Bloom was smart. He didn't want that in there. He didn't want that in there at all, and y'all got screwed in the end. As the lady said, listen to black folks when we talk to you next time.
Son of a... Gati! 逃したか。